In terms of, you started with options, and then obviously now you trade, which markets are you trading? You trade Forex?
Forex, major indices, and oil. I would say that's it, yeah.
And what was have you always been day trading, or was it different strategies?
Started out as day trading, 13 years. So most of what I did was very momentum based. So 5 or 6 markets, usually US markets in the afternoon. So cable, euro, dollar yen, Swissy, and all I was looking for was momentum signals. So most of what I learned from my mentor was moving average based. So that's where my focus is. I'm not saying they're better than anything else. It's just what I focused on. So I would literally sit there and filter those markets and look for multiple time frame momentum, and then just trade pullbacks. It was literally that simple, and probably easier back then in 2007 in terms of the number of runs you would get. But that was it for 13 years. Very, very simple. The only other thing I would do is I would fade at the end of the day. So I'd look, if the market had a good run, came into previous daily high, I would literally look for a divergence, and then I'd do an overnight fade. Again, don't know how reliable that would be now because it's not something I trade anymore. And that was it. That was what I would do day in, day out, week in, week out. And I really enjoyed it. But back in, well, it's probably about 9 years ago, I started adding in swing trading. I had people come to me saying, I want to learn from you, but I haven't got the time to sit in front of my screens all day. So it became more of what the students I was working with wanted. But also for me, I just found myself not wanting to be sat in front of my screens for so long. And now the thought of sitting in front of my screens all day as a day trader, not something I really want to do.
Yeah.
I like the swing trading experience. I like holding trades for longer. I'm happy to be in trades overnight, big positions. And I'm happy to go through periods, and I can financially go through periods where I don't make any money for a quarter because the trades will come. Yeah. And looking back at the data, most of my results come in about 3 months of the year. I would say probably 70% of what I make. It's not the same 3 months every year, but it's around, there's 3-4 months where
they say that they say a smaller portion of time is going to make up the bulk of your P&L.
Yeah.
It's just handling those other months where it's not as adventurous or as exciting, and it might be like some break even, slightly negative, small positives, versus those 3 months where it's obviously a lot larger. And I think going back to a similar thing than what we were talking about earlier is that most traders will have those 3 or 6 months, for example, and then make some sort of drastic decision from that euphoria, that euphoria and that greed and that I've cracked the market now.
Yeah.
And then end up going back to square one and then changing that strategy that did work. Yeah. But it's just time for it to have a slowdown in that period. Because I've noticed that in my journey is that it seems to be a very common theme, and I think you've alluded to it as well, in terms of you have a winning period, pretty much straight after there's going to be either a slowdown where you break even, or a lot of the time a losing period.
Yeah.
And I think one thing I've always observed, and I've said this in many podcasts, is I think a lot of traders out there are always looking for the strategy that always wins.
Yes.
But not only to that point, but to a point where they will always be able to predict every uptick and downtick of the market.
Yep.
I remember there was one particular trader I've used as an example a few times where he was making good returns per month for 3 months, right? He'd put in the work, stayed in the market, journaled the trade, so on and so forth. Profitable for 3 months, but yet still changed his strategy, because I assume he would and he did it twice. I saw him go from this strategy to the second one to a third one, even though the second one was profitable too. Went to a third one anyway. And I think simply because he assumes that there's going to be one thing he will learn that will allow him to go buy, sell, and just read the market like a book, essentially. And I personally think that doesn't exist.
Doesn't exist. I again, speaking from my own perspective, I don't think it exists. I think it's that, and I also think it's just human nature. It's like if your dream car is a 911 Carrera 4S, and you have that for 6 months, it becomes the norm, and you'll be looking at something else. It's the same with any kind of purchase. I remember when me and my wife, we got the house we're not in anymore, but when at the time it was like, this is our dream house. Within 3 months, we're back on Rightmove. So I think there's a innate nature in humans that this once you get consistent at something, it becomes the norm. You're looking for more. And sometimes I'll highlight that with a trader, and I'm like, your downfall at the moment is that you're almost too hungry. So they're either looking for the mystical edge, the mystical perfect trading system, or they just by default get used to 5% a month or regular, and they're like, I want more. And what they forget is that what other industry will that 5%, if you perform no better for the next 5 years, how much more that 5% in cash in your back pocket will be in 5 years' time? Now, if you're in sales and you hit your target, next quarter your targets are going up. If you're in operations and you meet your cost spending objectives, the next quarter they're making you. There's very few industries where you can have, in essence, a static, unimproving performance over a 5-year period and be paid more at the end of it. And that's something that's always sat with me, and I try and remember that, because I had the same thing last year. I had my biggest cash winning trade that I'd ever had, and despite all of the experience and what I'd say to others, I can remember I was like, okay, I've done 71 grand and I'm level headed about it, I feel good. But I noticed something is I had a 5 grand winner a week later, and I was like, I could even feel just being a little bit And I was like, and like I said earlier, even though I know it and I've got the experience, I was like, 5 grand. Even though I knew logically that big winner is not coming next week, because it was a culmination of trades at that time that statistically only happen once every 18 months, 2 years. And I know logically it's not happening, but even I was like, I want the bigger money.
Yeah.
So it happens to everybody I think is affected on some level. It's whether or not you can put that to bed and carry on objectively. Yeah. But I really like what you said about the mystical strategy that doesn't exist, because I think that's something
they're all hunting for. Is what they call the Holy Grail, right?
Exactly.
The Holy Grail strategy. And